Welcome to this week's college readout. As you know, the college meeting was brought forward from next Wednesday to today. The college met at 8:30 this morning, so we thank you very much for being present with us on this Sunday morning. We will now have the college readout, which, as you know, focuses on the conditionality mechanism, and this readout will then immediately be followed by an off-the-record technical briefing. Commissioner Hahn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, we tried to be fast in order to save your Sunday, so we are actually earlier than scheduled. It was not only about, of course, the main topic, but we also had another topic today at the agenda, and this was about our recommendation to improve cancer screening and the rule of law. Cancer screening. This will be presented in detail by Commissioner Kyriakides on Tuesday afternoon, so I can move immediately to the issue which is under my direct responsibility. And indeed, we had a very good, excellent discussion today, and I can report that the college took a unanimous decision about the next step in the procedure concerning Hungary under the conditionality regulation. As you know, we have a whole toolbox of instruments with different methodologies protecting the rule of law. This is the first case under the conditionality mechanism, which, as you know, entered into force on the 1st of January 2021 and aims at protecting the financial interests of the Union. For example, it is about breaches of the rule of law. That means it's about breaches of the rule of law compromising the use and management of EU funds. As President von der Leyen confirmed in this week's State of the Union address, the Commission will also protect our budget through the conditionality mechanism. In exactly this spirit, the Commission is proposing measures to the Council for the protection of the Union budget against breaches of the principles of the rule of law in Hungary. This case started when the Commission notified Hungary in April earlier this year about our concerns relating to breaches of the principles of law, rule of law, that create, and this is important because it's about the scope, a risk for the EU budget. This concerns first systematic irregularities and deficiencies and weaknesses in public procurement. Second, insufficiencies in addressing conflict of interest and concerns regarding public interest trusts. Third, weaknesses in the effective pursuit of investigations and prosecutions in cases involving Union funds. And finally, shortcomings in the anti-corruption framework. In July, the Commission informed Hungary of what budgetary protection measures we would propose to the Council unless Hungary developed adequate remedial measures to fix the issue we had flagged up. Over the summer, Hungary committed 17 remedial measures to address the risks of the EU budget. These are detailed and assessed in the communication we just adopted. With these measures, Hungary has made important and public commitments in the right direction, and I would like to explicitly welcome this constructive engagement, even if it was at a late stage, but what counts are indeed the results. So I give you some examples. First, and I think this is something one has to highlight, a new and independent integrity authority with extensive powers. Second, an anti-corruption task force with strong involvement of specialized NGOs. Further, the modification of the criminal code to allow judicial review of prosecutorial decisions. Then, systematic use of the Commission's data mining and risk scoring tool, Arachne. This makes public who gets which funding. It's an issue which are pushing for years also with our member states, and it will be subject of the modification of our financial regulations, but here we go already ahead. Changes to the Public Procurement Act to clarify rules applying to public interest funds. Reform of the asset declaration system for high-profile public officials, ministers, state secretaries, but also members of the parliament. To consider these remedial measures to be adequate, the Commission needs to be able to conclude that they will put an end to the identified risks for the Union budget and the EU financial interests. Our conclusion is that the proposed remedial measures could, in principle, be capable of addressing the issues described in the notification if they are correctly specified in relevant laws and rules and implemented accordingly. However, important details of the proposed measures are still to be determined and assessed, in particular how their key elements will be reflected in the actual legal texts. This is natural, as the timelines and deadlines under this regulation are, rightly so, very tight. Additionally, several of the issues the Commission has identified require not only changes in the legal framework, but concrete changes in practice, which requires more time to deliver concrete results. Therefore, the Commission's assessment is that a risk for the budget at this stage remains. Therefore, we cannot conclude that the EU budget is sufficiently protected. The Commission has therefore proposed measures to the Council. The Commission proposes a suspension of 65% of the commitments for 3 operational programs under cohesion policy, amounting to an estimated amount of 7.5 billion euro, which is over 1/3 of Hungary's cohesion envelope, and the prohibition to enter into legal commitments with so-called public interest trusts is the second element. The measures take into account the remedial measures Hungary has submitted. The Commission will now monitor the situation. Hungary has committed to fully inform the Commission about the implementation of the remedial measures by 19th of November, as also outlined in the timeline published in our proposal. At that point, we will assess the situation again and act accordingly. Our ultimate objective under this mechanism is that the budget is no longer at risk, and we hope to achieve this as soon as possible through the adequate reforms in Hungary. Today, we show the power of this new protective tool to fix problems. We have seen significant movement at the level of reform commitments. At the same time, our proposal to the Council is equally an expression that we will suspend funds to protect the budget if the promised fixes are not applied. And it was, amongst all my colleagues, a common understanding and also spelled out by them that this mechanism already delivers. And I think this is also something which we have to emphasize again and again. It's now a very powerful tool, and we are very confident that by the end of the day we will see significant reforms in Hungary, which indeed will be a game changer.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. There is no surprise. We have 2 Hungarian hands which are raised. We will start with the ladies. Katalin.
Thank you very much, Eric. Katalin Halmai, Hungarian newspaper Népszava. I have 2 questions, if I may. The first, how can you take seriously the Hungarian government commitment without a commitment to guarantee the independence of the judiciary? And secondly, about the anti-corruption framework institutions, how can you guarantee the independence of these Integrity Authority and the Anti-Corruption Task Force in a country where all so-called independent authorities and institutions are independent only on paper, from the competition authority, the Court of Auditors to media authority. So what guarantees do you see that this institutional framework will be genuinely independent? Thank you.
Well, on this integrity authority, I think it's important to see how it is composed. It's only applicable to people which, for instance, didn't have any membership to a political party, at least not for the past 5 years, who haven't been any, who didn't have any political mandate for the past 5 years. By the way, this should also apply after they have left office. They can only be appointed once for 6 years. They are independent. We also take care that they are adequately paid. And of course, all this is a very public process. And indeed, the setup of this integrity authority, including the members, is already part and parcel of the key elements which have to be delivered by November. So I think we will see how this committee, how this authority is composed, and this will be, of course, crucial for our assessment. And therefore, I'm confident and I hope that there are many interests of really independent but also knowledgeable people on this subject which apply for these jobs.
Zoltán.
Thank you indeed, Zoltán Gyivai, Free Europe. Commissioner, what is the earliest date? You mentioned the date, the kind of deadline, 19th of November. What is the earliest date that the Hungarian government or Hungary can be off the hook? So what is the timetable here? The second question is about the impact you can exercise on Mr. Orbán's behavior, because the Commission for years have been looking for efficient instruments to trigger some kind of behavioral changes in Hungary. I remind you the cohesion policy, for example, issues. Do you think so that the threat of withdrawal of money, this is the ultimate instrument the European Commission can really use to trigger changes, sustainable changes in Hungary? Thank you.
Well, concerning the timetable, may I recall, so to say, the legal constraints. I think, again, it's important to highlight this is the only tool within the rule of law toolbox where we have a clear time frame with a beginning and a defined end. And of course, the defined end can move within a certain time frame, and that means that after our submission to the Council at the latest by the 22nd of September, the Council has 1 month's time, but can, under certain circumstances, extend it for another 2 months. And I have to say that the roadmap we have agreed with the Hungarians in order to deliver really on these 17 key elements needs a certain time. That's why we will gently ask the Council to extend indeed the time frame to the max possible, because I think one has to be serious. The implementation of what is, so to say, foreseen means in several areas legal procedures, and for this you need certain time. And coming back to the integrity authority, it's not only about the legal so say structure, but so say the key element, the key measure is already indeed the setup, to see how indeed this integrity authority is composed. That's why it's fair to give, so to say, some more time in order really to see the concrete and to evaluate the concrete results. I mean, what we have seen in the past couple of weeks since we submitted our intention letter, that Hungary has indeed moved. And I mean, if you take the measures, if you look at these measures also, how they are interlinked to each other, I think it's a significant step forward and can really and will definitely contribute to protect European taxpayers' money. So I'm very confident that this is indeed in this area a real game changer.
Yeah.
Another Hungarian question, Sándor from Euronews. So how far did you take into consideration the opinions of the European Parliament that they pushed out this week that Hungary was not anymore a full democracy, it was a kind of autocracy? And I would like to know also, how will you check the implementations of these crucial Hungarian anti-corruption measures in the coming years once, you know, these laws were adopted? Thanks.
Well, first, of course, we have taken note of the EP declaration or resolution. It was not a surprise, but to be honest, we would not be there today where we are if we would not have started all our work already months ago. So we know quite well what we have to do, and we did, and I think we really delivered, not only today, and I'm really grateful to our teams, to my team, for their tireless work, in particular they did over the summer months. Number one. Number two, there are, once again, I have to recall, this instrument forces us to finish the procedure after a certain time, at the latest 9 months after its beginning. So this was theoretically by the end of December. And as I explained, we are talking about a lot of measures where we will see concrete results indeed after, so to say, this deadline. And this is why we will carefully monitor the implementation, not only the implementation, but the results. And for this, we have, let's say, two opportunities. One, coincidentally, that some of the elements we are discussing and hopefully agreeing with the Hungarians within the conditionality mechanism can be transferred into the ongoing RRP negotiations as milestones. And give you an example, one of our key points of criticism was the high number of single biddings or single bidders in public procurement cases. We are talking about around 50% of all the public procurements have only seen one bidder. This is far above the European average. I think the second country is at around 15%. And of course, Hungary has to show how to gradually decline and arrive at the European average. And this is not something you can do from one year to the other, from one day to the other, but over months and maybe 1 or 2 years, you can arrive to it, and therefore we can use this opportunity of these ongoing negotiations, which is a coincidence, and I want to stress both negotiations or discussions are separate from each other, but if there are opportunities, let's use it. And the other thing is, and also this is something which is important to recall again and again, this is an instrument which, in the case it doesn't show the expected results, it's always possible to start such a procedure again and again. So it's not a one-off action, but I'm very confident that, again, the current procedure will show the expected results, and I think we should be fair and optimistic that this is the case. But if not, we have again means to address this.
So I think we've exhausted the questions from the Hungarian correspondents. Mark.
Yes, good morning, Mark Peperkorn, Volkskrant. I'm going to help my Hungarian colleagues a bit because it's the question of Zoltan, which you, in my opinion, didn't answer. My question and Zoltan's question is, actually, if we look back, since 2007, the Commission is actually hammering on Hungary, please, you know, do something about the way you spend EU money. Only now we see a change. Is the Commission now concluding that actually only money pressure, financial pressures, or the threat of taking money away helps? Thanks.
First, we see commitments, we see promises, and we will see over the next 2 months how they are quasi fulfilled and implemented. And here, indeed, I am confident once again. Second, obviously, financial pressure shows its effect. Unfortunately, it's the case, but this was exactly, if you like, the intention when Parliament and Council adopted these regulations, to have an additional powerful tool to address certain areas within the overall scope of rule of law deficiencies.
Tomasz.
Tomasz Bielecki, Deutsche Welle and Gazeta Wyborcza. Commissioner, last November, European Commission sent 2 letters in the framework of the rule of the conditionality regulation. The second country was Poland. You pointed out the Polish problems with the primacy of the EU law and politicized General Prosecutor Office. So my question is, what convinced you to discontinue these proceedings regarding Poland under this procedure, under the conditionality regulation? Thank you.
Well, as I said, we have different toolboxes for different purposes. And you know that this conditionality mechanism was challenged by Hungary and Poland at the European Court of Justice. And the court gave a clear ruling that, of course, this regulation is in compliance with the treaty. But the court ruling was also very detailed, so to say, establishing clear, so to say, purposes how this can and should be applied. And it has to be a sufficient link to the risk of the European budget. And in the Polish case, we haven't seen, if we are talking about the independence of the judiciary, which is an issue in Poland, but we haven't seen, or we didn't have an evidence about a sufficient link to the European budget. That's why this issue of independence of the judiciary in Poland had to be pursued by means of other instruments within our toolbox. And this was the reason. But if things are changing, if we have more evidence, and by the way, this mechanism is a mechanism which equally can affect all member states, we will, of course, act.
Robert Sigmund, Österreichischer Rundfunk. I will ask my question in German, if that's okay. Herr Kommissar, jetzt haben wir die Reaktion von Viktor Orban auf das Europäische Parlament erlebt. Er hat das als Witz bezeichnet. Jetzt sprechen Sie von positiven Schritten auch. Besteht nicht die Gefahr, dass die Zentrifugalkräfte jetzt wieder stärker werden, dass das als Einmischung von außen gebrandet wird und das wieder zu einem Rückschritt möglicherweise kommt durch den finanziellen Druck?
Also, Sie verstehen, dass ich mich da in diesen Disput zwischen Europäisches Parlament und ungarischer Regierung nicht einmische. Was für mich zählt, sind die Resultate unserer Aktivitäten. Und wir wollen mit unseren Aktivitäten, das ist auch unser Verständnis, die Dinge zu einem Besseren wenden. Und mit den Maßnahmen, die wir heute öffentlich gemacht haben, glaube ich, geht das in die richtige Richtung. Und daher bin ich eigentlich zuversichtlich, dass sich hier die Dinge zu einem Guten wenden und kann aber nur appellieren an alle Beteiligten in ihrer Wortwahl. Und das inkludiert selbstverständlich auch die ungarische Regierung, sozusagen auf das gegenseitige Aufeinanderzugehen sich zu konzentrieren. Und es geht auch in der gegenwärtigen Phase um den Wiederaufbau von Vertrauen. Das ist keine Frage, das ist essentiell und ohne dem wird man auch nicht die nachhaltigen Fortschritte sehen in unseren Beziehungen.
Okay, one last question from the press room before I move over a bit to the platform. Go ahead.
Thanks. Janos Allenbach-Ammann from Euractiv. I have two questions. So you say you cut or suspend about 7.5 billion euros. You say it's about 1/3 of the cohesion funding, but the corruption problem remains for the rest of the funding. So why do you keep these other 2/3 of cohesion funding exposed to the corruption problems of the EU? What is your thinking behind that? And then you seem rather lenient with the timeline, saying, yeah, we want to see how this thing develops. And but I mean, if the Hungarian government did take this seriously, we wouldn't be at this point now. So what did the government do to deserve your trust, your leniency in this regard?
Well, on the first, simply to put it into so say respective, this 7.5 is more than, for instance, the possible allocation from the RRP fund. So it's not nothing. Second, referring to the Court of Justice ruling, we have to apply proportionality and adequacy. And as our focus was and is areas where we see the European budget at risk, and this is, for instance, in the case of public procurement, we have chosen those cohesion programs which have seen in the past and most likely also in the future the highest number of public procurement cases. So on average, I think 95% of the entire spending within these programs will be public procurement. And this is why we have chosen these programs, and we have finally taken the decision to recommend as so the possible measures to the Council to suspend 65% of this overall allocation of these three programs. Concerning the second question, again, I would say the advantage, the charm of this conditionality mechanism is that it cannot be dragged out by whoever, but we have to take a decision, or decisions have to be taken, otherwise the file is closed. And this is why we have to work on key elements, on key deliverables, which are crucial, which are achievable, but of course many of them are the foundation for a future possible development, and this is something we have to monitor. But within the given time frame, we cannot, so to say, see already first results. But we can lay the foundation that we see the results we want to see and we expect, and this is why I'm again confident that this will be the case, as we have also in the future means to intervene if, against all the indications and assumptions, we are not there where we want to be.
Thank you. We now move to the Interaxio platform, and I give the floor to Lily Bayer.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, you mentioned that if needed, you will restart the procedure. Are you concerned at all that the Hungarian government's strategy might be just to stall until the deadline in December? And do you foresee a scenario where you don't have enough data and you will simply restart this very same procedure in January? Thank you very much.
Well, we have to make an assessment, I suppose, because the Council certainly will ask us, and on basis of this, a decision has to be taken in one or the other way. I'm only saying if, so to say, under the assumption that everything is done according what is, so to say, in discussion, in the making, then we see we expect a positive result. To start again a procedure is necessary if things either evolve not in the way we expect or something different pops up. But this is something which would also apply to other countries. Once again, it's an instrument which is not a one-off, but it's something which is in place, which can be used whenever necessary.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll take two last questions, and then we will move over to the technical briefing. There's a question, for example, on how much funding Hungary is going to get in this current financial framework. I think that's very appropriate for the technical briefing. Thomas Guszka, you've got the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. Two questions. The regulation foresees or gives an option to Prime Minister Orban to call upon the European Council. Has it been agreed in the context of the roadmap that you mentioned that he will not do that? And the second question, originally in July, the figure you mentioned was 70% of funding that is at risk. Why is it now 65%? Thank you.
On the first, I have no knowledge, but honestly, currently, I don't expect something which is deviating from what we are discussing and having agreed, because now there is, so to say, really a clear understanding on the Hungarian side that they have to deliver. Why we moved from 70 to 65? We have, this is also within this regulation to take into account if there is a movement, and indeed there was and there is a movement in the way that very concrete, altogether 17 measures are proposed, if you like, promised. This is not nothing. There have been very detailed already discussions on this subject, and that's why we have to acknowledge this. But at the same time, why it's only, some could say, only 5% less, the issue is simply that now we are still at the level of promises, announcements, serious ones, concrete ones, but nothing more. And that's why we feel obliged to keep this, I would say, a rather high percentage, as long as not finally the things are delivered and implemented as expected.
Thank you. Last question for Markus Becker.
Again, about those 7.5 billion euros. You're saying, Commissioner, that this is 1/3 of the cohesion funds, but please correct me if I miscalculate, but I think it's only 1/5 of the overall funding Hungary gets from the European Union. So there have been legal scholars, for example, recently who said in expertise that Hungary should be given nothing at all anymore because of the exact systemic problems you have mentioned earlier. So why so little, and how confident are you that this, like 1/5 of the overall funds, will actually be enough to change Hungary's behavior? And a second question, if I may, how confident are you that the qualified majority in the Council will be reached in order to put these sanctions into effect? Thank you.
Well, first, I mean, in this overall calculation over overall amount, probably, for instance, the RRP is included, but this is not yet agreed. So I think we should focus on what is so far in the making or already concrete. And again, important is we have to respect the regulation. We have, I mean, criticizing deficiencies in rule of law means that the one who is the applicant of all this has to be, so to say, 150% rule of law determined. And this is why we have to respect the regulation. We have to respect the court ruling, where they explicitly ask us to respect the principle of proportionality and adequacy. And all this has been, so to say, taken into account when we took or we made the necessary proposals. And as you can see on the first results, apparently already this amount being at stake was and is sufficient enough because you could see that the Hungarian government moved once we have sent the intention letter where we have been very clear and precise what would be the possible consequences. And I'm pretty sure that the Council will end up to a similar identical assessment we did as Commission in case things are not evolving in the way, again, we would have or we will expect.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of this press conference. Please stay connected. Those of you who are on the Interaxio platform, keep your hand raised. We now move to the off-the-record technical briefing, so you will have an opportunity to ask your question there. Thank you, Commissioner.